Hey guys, tonight we're going to ease into a story that everybody thinks they know. You've probably heard some version of it, usually whispered dramatically in documentaries or yelled by that one history enthusiast who definitely owns more togas than socially acceptable. But don't worry, we're not going epic tonight. We're going sleepy. Real sleepy. So go ahead. Dim the lights. Fluff the pillow behind your head. Forget whatever crisis modern life insisted on handing you today. And let's drift, very gently, into the soft, papery chaos of the ancient world's most overhyped and somehow still underappreciated intellectual playground. The Great Library of Alexandria. A place that wanted to be the world's brain, and instead became the world's tragic cautionary tale about fire safety, political instability, and putting too much trust in men with torches. Because, of course it did. Now, before we get into the part where everything eventually burns, because this is ancient history and everything always burns, let's just slowly glide into the setting. Imagine the Mediterranean around the 3rd century BCE. Warm breezes, endless coastlines, ships quietly creaking against wooden docks, and somewhere in the distance, a bunch of philosophers arguing loudly about whether numbers are real or just a cosmic prank. Into this gentle chaos stroll the Ptolemies, a royal dynasty that can basically be summarized as Greek, dramatic, and absolutely determined to turn Egypt into their personal group project. And group projects, as we all know, rarely go well, especially when the entire royal family insisted on marrying each other like it was a competitive sport. But we're not drifting into their DNA soup just yet. Tonight we're focusing on their big intellectual flex, the library. The brainchild of rulers who wanted the world's knowledge, preferably all in one place, preferably under their own control. Because why not centralize information when you're already centralizing your family tree? To set the tone properly, let's float for a moment into Alexandria itself. A city that Alexander the Great founded even though he spent approximately 5 minutes there before wandering off to conquer half the planet. Classic Alexander, building cities like some people collect fridge magnets. When he died, his general Ptolemy took control of Egypt and went, "You know what this place needs? Culture, drama, a research hub. Maybe a lighthouse tall enough to make Zeus feel insecure." And so Alexandria became the kind of city where philosophers scribbled on wax tablets, priests handled scrolls like they were allergic to the real world, ambitious royals stared at maps and argued about borders, and someone somewhere definitely muttered, "Did we really need another temple?" And in the heart of all that humidity and ambition, construction began on the most famous library in human history. A place that people today talk about with the exact same tone tech bros use when talking about the metaverse. You know, full of hope, idealism, and absolutely no awareness that everything might go catastrophically wrong later. Let's drift down the polished halls of the early library, known as the Mauseon, which did not mean museum in the modern sense, but rather Temple of the Muses, a place dedicated to the divine ladies of creativity, wisdom, and general inspiration. The ancient equivalent of naming your workspace the Innovation Hub. Inside this sanctuary of genius, you'd find scrolls stacked like ancient fire hazards, scholars pacing slowly, probably overthinking everything, quiet lamps flickering in the warm Egyptian air, and somewhere a bored scribe eating grapes and pretending to take notes. The Ptolemies invited scholars from across the world, thinkers from Athens, astronomers from Babylon, doctors from wherever people were still experimenting with questionable herbal remedies. They offered them leisure, housing, salaries, free food, and most importantly, no chores, which, let's be honest, is pretty much the dream. The result was less library and more intellectual resort, a place where men in sandals wandered about, muttering to themselves about geometry or the meaning of dreams, and occasionally bumping into pillars because thinking too hard is hazardous to spatial awareness. It wasn't a public library. It wasn't a quiet reading space. It was a high-powered research center where smart people lived full-time and spent most of their days doing what academics still do best: arguing. Now, one thing that made the library famous, aside from the whole "it eventually burned down" thing, was the Ptolemies' absolutely unhinged policy of acquiring books. And I say acquiring as politely as possible. If you sailed into Alexandria, congratulations. Your books were now the property of the library. Every papyrus scroll on your ship, didn't matter if it was a family recipe or your grandmother's diary, was confiscated by royal decree. They would take it, copy it, keep the original, and give you back the copy. A bold move. Very on brand for a family that thought they owned everything, including each other. Because of this law, Alexandria accumulated tens of thousands of scrolls, maybe hundreds of thousands. Numbers vary because, shockingly, nobody bothered to catalog everything before the fire started. Apparently, even librarians procrastinate. This method of book collecting was, let's call it, aggressive curation. But it worked. Within a century, the library became the beating heart of ancient scholarship. If you were anyone important in the world of thinking, you came here. Or at least claimed you did, because even back then, people exaggerated their academic resumes. Let's take a slow breath and float into the mind of one of the library's earliest star scholars, Xanatus, the first head librarian. Imagine this man's daily stress: mountains of scrolls, dozens of cranky intellectuals, a royal family that loved drama more than literacy. And Xanatus was essentially the world's first professional guy in charge of sorting other people's nonsense. He created one of the earliest alphabetical systems for organizing texts, even though the Greek alphabet wasn't exactly built for this kind of thing. Imagine inventing alphabetical order, but only being halfway sure where some letters belong. It's the kind of administrative nightmare that would make a modern librarian gently weep. But he tried. He did his best. We respect him for that. Later came Apollonius, who managed both the library and a famously messy feud with another scholar that involved poetry, politics, and probably some pettiness that never made it into the official records. Which is a shame because ancient academic drama is always the best drama. And then there was Eratosthenes, the man who calmly decided to calculate the circumference of the earth using shadows and sticks. Because, why not? A project so wholesome and nerdy that feels like something a modern YouTuber would attempt for views. Eratosthenes was the beige cardigan of ancient scholars. Steady, reliable, quietly brilliant. Someone who definitely had neat handwriting and an early bedtime. One of the library's biggest flexes was the idea that knowledge was worth gathering simply for the sake of having it. Not for war, not for politics, not for survival, just because information is nice. A very cozy, almost sleepy philosophy, which is probably why it pairs so well with bedtime storytelling. And the Ptolemies, bless their self-important hearts, encouraged this. Even though they ruled Egypt like a royal soap opera, they genuinely invested in learning. It made them look sophisticated. It made Alexandria feel important. And it probably helped distract people from whatever fresh scandal was brewing in the palace. But knowledge, like power, comes with baggage. And the library soon